Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast where writers sit around drinking tasty beverages to talk about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. There will be rants and raves and opinions that may not agree but are lovingly delivered. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Today, your hosts are myself, Jeannie Warner, and David Welsh. We are delighted on episode 219 to have an interview with Dr. Robin Bernstein. Welcome, Dr. Bernstein.
Thank you so much for having me.
May I call you Robin? And can I get your pronouns so that I do not make any mistakes?
Robin is great, and she, her.
Sounds wonderful. I really appreciated when they sent me your book, a copy, Freeman's Challenge, The Murder That Shook America's Original Prison for Profit. I want to say, wow, I learned a lot in this book. This was really, really a powerful, awesome book. So one, straight up, thank you for writing this awesome book.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm going to say you are what seems to be an expert in the origins of carceral or penal labor. I need to say penal because apparently internally I'm 12 years old in the U.S. And there's a big piece of this because I have personal family issues and challenges of knowing a little bit more than I want to do about penal labor. And this is about how it all got started in about 1840. There was a single event of a certain guy named Freeman, and you wrote a whole book around him. How did you decide that this was something you wanted to write the book about?
I stumbled across William Freeman's life by accident, and this is how a lot of history books get started, I think. It's an accident. And then I thought, this is really interesting. This is a teenager, an African-American and Native American teenager who in 1840 was accused of a horse theft that he swore he did not commit. And this was in New York State. And there was no hard evidence against him, but it didn't matter. He was tried, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to 5 years hard labor in the Auburn State Prison. And in this prison, prisoners' labor was leased to private companies. And this was 1840. And when I learned about this, I thought, wait, what? There was convict leasing in a profit-driven prison in the North in 1840? And the reason I was so surprised was because I had this image in my mind that profit-driven incarceration began in the South, and it began after the Civil War, after the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which outlawed forced labor, quote, except as a punishment for crime. So like a lot of people, I had this idea that profit-driven incarceration was was something that the South invented in order to re-enslave African Americans after emancipation. So I was really surprised to see the North doing this long before the Civil War, long before the 13th Amendment. And I thought, wow, I have a PhD in American Studies. If I didn't know this, I bet a lot of other people don't know this either. And I started learning more and more about William Freeman, this individual kid, this teenager, who rose up against this profit-driven carceral system long before the Civil War. And just the more I learned about him, the more hooked I was, the more I thought, this is a story that has to be told.
It absolutely does. I mean, from the land of science fiction, and I want to say there's been a whole bunch of what is the right way to address prisons. And you have a little bit of that in your book because you have the Auburn and Sing Sing system versus what the Pennsylvania version, which is where they were actually trying for. What is the goal of putting somebody in prison? Is it to make them pay? Is this to repay society? Or are we looking for penitence? Are we looking for, what is the goal of putting somebody in prison? It's a huge question that opens up as a part of this. And one of them absolutely is profit. As a matter of fact, you may not be aware, but California in our 2024 ballot initiative had the should we get rid of this system in California, and it failed. honestly, I think it failed because people didn't really know and understand what the heck it was.
Yeah, I do know about that bill that failed in California, and it was very disappointing. And part of the reason it was so disappointing was it failed despite an absence of an organized effort to make it fail. So that was especially devastating to a lot of people that I've been working with right now to change the profit-driven carceral system. So yeah, that was a pretty devastating defeat. I do want to say though that there have been some very important successes in either radically reforming or even eliminating forced prison labor. Nobody is trying to eliminate labor in prison because people who are in prison as an overall group, they want to work for all the same reasons that people who are not incarcerated want to work. I want to work. I don't want to be idle. And so it's not that prison labor is necessarily a problem. What is a problem is forced prison labor. What is a problem is prison labor under deplorable conditions, dangerous conditions, underpaid conditions, conditions that do not support life, that do not support the soul. These are the things to be fought.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I have the hope will come out of books like yours is just opening this up to people to say, do you understand how this works at all?
Mm-hmm.
Because part of it is, how do you know to vote against something if you don't understand it?
Yeah, I mean, my what I wanted to do in my book is really expose where this horrible system came from. What is the origin of this really weird idea that a prison can exist first and foremost for profit? That's a bizarre idea. So, one thing that I want to raise for people who read this book is the question, why should any non-incarcerated person benefit financially from another person's incarceration? What right do I, as a non-incarcerated person, have to profit and benefit from an incarcerated person's labor? It's a bizarre idea that we as non-incarcerated people should have the right to benefit. And I want people to really take in the weirdness of that. And this was what William Freeman was saying back in 1840. He was saying that he was a citizen. He was not an enslaved person. He was never an enslaved person. He was an African American growing up free in the North. He was the first member of his family to be part of a fully free generation. His father had been enslaved, his grandparents had been enslaved, but he was a free person until he was pushed into the Auburn State Prison, where he was actually told that he was, quote, a slave of the state. That was the actual language that the prison used with prisoners. You are now a slave of the state. And William Freeman was outraged. His belief was correctly that he was not a slave, he was a citizen, and therefore he deserved to benefit from his work.
I liked the way you phrased it, and I copied and pasted it so I could like say I love the way the words work. He asserted that the consumer's intention was none of the seller's concern. Payment alienated a commodity from its producer. So basically, it was the unarticulated principle by which the local people tolerated forced labor in their midst. But he said it out loud that just by paying for something means I'm not related to, I don't know where all these license plates come from. I just put them on my car. It's not my concern.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm
Well,
so glad you brought up.
and he said that in a, well, the part I remember him saying that in was in a completely different context in the book too. So it was regarding a transaction that he made with somebody else after he got out, right? So it was like it was clearly his philosophy or his belief, and not just in relation to his labor in the prison.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad, Jeannie, I'm so glad that you brought up license plates because license plates are all New York State license plates. Every single one is actually made in the Auburn prison where William Freeman was incarcerated. So back in the 1800s, the Auburn State Prison was basically built as a giant factory. And William Freeman was forced to work in factories inside the Auburn prison. He was forced to make rugs. He was forced to dye silk. And he was forced to make animal harnesses. All of these were factories built into the prison from the beginning. And today, the Auburn prison still exists. It is now called the Auburn Correctional Facility. It is the oldest continually operating maximum security prison in the United States, and it is still functioning as a giant factory. So every single New York State license plate is made in the Auburn prison, and it is made by men who are literally walking in William Freeman's footsteps.
I believe it, and I love that your book brought together ideas that we hear in other things, like everybody's heard of Sing Sing
Mm-hmm.
because almost because of the movie Constantine and some of the work done with the cartoons there of saying this was the electric chair used in Sing Sing to torture people. So not just kill them, but also torture them. And so people have an abstract of these ideas existed, but I don't think they understand the core of trade and commerce that people were getting out of it, like because it's cheap. And we see a possibility, reprehensible it is now, that people are just saying, hey, we could use this with immigrant labor. We could use this with anybody that breaks a law, and we could put them in and then send them into the fields to pick melons or whatever.
Yeah, it's an incredibly dangerous idea.
It is. Now, you also referred to different events of history that I don't know if people know about. So this is going to be people learning about history, like Nat Turner had the anti-slavery rebellion in Virginia that made them, oh my God, we can't free the slaves. They'll just murder us all in our sleep because we've treated them so badly. And there's a lot that you touch about in terms of propaganda and how powerful that is in politics and commerce alike.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another section that I really loved is when they were asking all of the questions, like, I loved that they were concerned about, well, why did you kill on March the 12th? For one, I did not realize that my birthday was such a cool murder thing. So happy birthday to me, William.
I don't think that's something to be proud of, but carry on.
Well, because Wednesday's Child is full of woe, so I've been fighting that my whole life. So at least this one had a murder to make it interesting. But they had questions of why these people, why did you murder a child, and why? And that you brought up the unspoken questions that terrorism provokes. Why kill that family, not mine, not me? How do I feel safe if there's murderers out there? And I'm sure that's how they sell gun and security systems today. People want to feel safe.
Well,
Yeah.
that's how they sell the entire carceral system in the United States.
That too.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So William Freeman went into the Auburn State Prison because he was accused of a horse theft. And then while he was in prison, he was treated horribly. He was forced to labor 12 hours a day for no compensation at all, no payment, no special favors, no early release, literally nothing. And he was also beaten horribly. He was beaten by a guard at one point so badly that he sustained a brain injury. And then when he got out, it was 1845, he launched a legal campaign to recover what he saw as stolen wages. His perspective was that he had been put in the Auburn prison and forced to labor, quote, for nothing. That's what he said. And he meant two things by that. The first, that he was not receiving payment, which he was due as a citizen. That for him was what distinguished a citizen from an enslaved person. And it was really important to him that he was a citizen. So he was getting no payment. That was for nothing, but also for no crime, because he always insisted he was innocent of the horse theft. So he had been trying to get payment for his labor because that was the core of his identity as a citizen and not an enslaved person. After he got out from prison, he tried to launch a legal campaign to recover back wages. And he tried for 6 months. He went to lawyers. He went to the ex-governor of New York State, which was William Henry Seward, who later, 20 years later, became the Secretary of State to Abraham Lincoln. So he tried for 6 months and he was laughed at and he was dismissed. And then William Freeman resorted to violence. And when I say that, I'm not giving away anything in the book. It's right there in the title of the book, Freeman's Challenge, The Murder That Shook America's Original Prison for Profit. William Freeman challenged the Auburn system by committing a murder. And once he did that, people stopped laughing and they stopped dismissing him, and they had to deal with him in other ways. They had to deal with the challenge that he was making to the Auburn prison.
Well, he asked the question, who brought you up to kill? And all he could say was the state.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he blamed the state absolutely explicitly. He was very clear that his real target was the state.
Exactly. And because again, I love the psychology of it all. Like people needed a why they could understand, and they didn't want to say, all right, systemic abuse, physical, mental, emotional isn't enough to be a reason. Like that they make, if you owned a dog and you kicked the dog and you abused the dog, and then, the dog savaged a kid, I'm like, what made that dog do it? I'm like, well, dog owners.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But to acknowledge fault is hard.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like they did. I mean, it seems like the reasoning that they give. I mean, they, as you point out in the book, they tap dance around a lot of what are probably the real reasons that this whole thing happened. I mean, it was a very unfortunate series of events, which is a hard phrase, a funny phrase to use now because the book series is the same name. Um, but I mean, you allude to the fact that his brain injury might have had something to do with it, and and they talk about an insanity defense, but they don't even really address the brain issue as a root cause of that. So it's all this kind of weird talking around the real issues to try and frame them in terms that the voters and the commercial interests and the government can accept as racially justified.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So William Freeman was challenging the system of prison for profit in New York State, and that system was really powerful. That system was making Auburn prosperous because Auburn had become a kind of one company town. And this system, by the time William Freeman was incarcerated, the Auburn system had spread to places like Sing Sing. It had spread across New York State. It was making New York prosperous. It was one of the economic engines of New York in the 19th century was prisons. So and it was also very important politically. The prison was kind of a football that was passed back and forth by political parties. So when William Freeman challenged the Auburn system of prison for profit, he was challenging people's livelihoods. He was challenging the political system of New York State. He was challenging the pride of New York State that they had invented this new system of incarceration that by this point had gone worldwide. So he was challenging something that a lot of people were very invested in. And they did not want to hear this challenge. They did not want to hear that it was wrong to force people to work for nothing. And that was William Freeman's point. So, as you said, Dave, they really tap danced around and they were not willing to hear what William Freeman was actually saying. So they invented their own stories to make up what he was saying. And they put words in his mouth and said that he was just delusional, was a word that they used a lot. There is nothing delusional about wanting to be paid for your labor. That's a completely rational claim. But they decided, especially because he did have a brain injury, they decided that he was a purely irrational person. And one of the points that I'm making in this book is that it's totally possible for a person to have a brain injury and to have some impairments as a result of that brain injury and to make a coherent moral claim. There's no contradiction there. And so this is part of William Freeman's story that I really wanted to restore to the world and share with the world.
And I love that you brought up things like social ills, like poverty could cause crime. We look at that today and say, there was somebody who went into the prisons and said, what would have kept you out? And they said, housing, fair wages, grief counseling, after school activities. Here's a whole list of things that you could do that would reduce prisons, but then do we want to actually do them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I think the question becomes, what is prison for? What is the purpose of prison? And before the Auburn prison in New York State, prisons existed for some combination of three reasons. They existed either to punish people and or they existed to reform people, basically to help them to lead better lives, and or they existed for social control, basically to get people off the street. But what the Auburn prison came up with was this radical new idea. Who established this prison, they were businessmen. They were specific businessmen who reveal in the book who they are. I name them. And they came up with this radical new idea, which was that prisons didn't have to have anything to do with punishment or social control or reformation. They took all of that and they just threw it out the window. And they decided that instead a prison could exist first and foremost as a business enterprise. And that was a radical new idea. They came up with this idea in 1816, half a century before the Civil War. This idea was invented by specific people in New York State. And we have been living with this idea ever since. And it is a terrible, wrong idea.
Well, you also brought in, I loved later when you were saying these are all of the people that found a way to monetize the whole situation. And the fact that P.T. Barnum is in your story made me so happy. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
darkly happy, but happy that
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
flattery of basically saying Barnum positioned ordinary people as experts, which honestly I have plenty of in the internet today.
Mm-hmm.
But I've watched a YouTube video, so now I'm an expert on political science and crime. But it reinvented the spectators as cool-minded investigators instead of, oh my gosh, am I going to be let next or a failed lyncher? It basically, instead of making terror, it created intrigue,
Yeah.
which I don't know. Did that have something about a whole genre of literature that come up later? But
Yeah, it absolutely did. So, well, first of all, I should say when I started researching this book, I had no idea how many celebrities were going to show up in the book. I was astounded by how many people touched William Freeman's story and how many people were involved in one way or another. So P.T. Barnum is one person who shows up in the book in a pivotal moment. Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, and William Henry Seward, who I mentioned before. These are just some of the people who come across the pages of this book. And I was just endlessly astounded. Oh, Walt Whitman got involved in William Freeman's story. It is astounding. And that was one of the things when I was researching. Famous people just kept coming up again and again and again, and I just could not believe how important this story was to so many people at the time and today.
well, I do appreciate that you wrote this story and made it very accessible to anyone. Now, I may have read a shit ton of PhD papers and other things in the past, and I'm addicted to Mayo Clinic findings, etc. We can talk about writing for the level of your audience, and I noticed you had an undergrad credits in creative writing. Did that shape how you appropriated the words? Like you had 3 words, and you made me look them up, and I am so delighted because I so seldom have to look up words, and you had 3, and so yeah, go you. But the writing levels, it's approachable for anyone. Is that something you deliberately worked with to say, I want to write a book that anybody in the street can read and get this?
Absolutely. Every single word in this book is true. I made up nothing. And yet I wanted it to read like a novel. I wanted to write a book that anybody could pick up and would not be able to put down. And part of the reason for this was that the story that we've all received about prison for profit being an invention of the South, it being a post-Civil War invention, that story has really gotten embedded in popular consciousness. And I thought, I want to tell this other story, this challenging story. And I really want people I want it to be so vivid that nobody will ever forget it. So I wanted to write a book that people would read, that they wouldn't be able to stop reading, a book that would linger in their minds. I should say that it's a very short book. It's under 200 pages and it has almost 50 images. So this is a book that I hope people will read like a novel. And yeah, it was very, very important to me. My background is in creative writing. I was a creative writer before I was a historian. For many years, I was a playwright. I have published poetry. I have published fiction. And for 2 years in between college and grad school, I worked as a journalist. And in those 2 years, I published about 100 pieces. So I was really publishing a lot, and I was publishing in every genre. And then I went to grad school and I started focusing more and more on history. But the truth is, I'm a writer before I'm a historian. And I really care about writing history that people will be able to read and fully understand, but also that they'll enjoy reading, that they'll want to read. I want people to meet William Freeman, and I want them to care about him, and I want them to remember him because he deserves that.
I did actually read your CV, and I need to know, when do you sleep? Is there sleep that ever happens?
I don't sleep enough.
So, in terms of your process, I also ran across a word that was familiar and made me giggle, the Pomodorians. Do you? For those who have not followed earlier episodes, the Pomodoro technique of getting shit done means you turn on your little tomato timer, set it for 10 minutes because anybody can do anything for 10 minutes. Did you ever find that useful to just, okay, I really need to sit and work on this section, or I'm going to edit that, or I need to look that up? Do you still use it?
I absolutely do. So I became a devotee of Pomodoro sessions during the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, I had a habit of writing in a local coffee shop. Well, then the coffee shop closed and I couldn't write in my local coffee shop anymore. And I had to figure out a new way to write. So I reached out to friends on the internet and a group of friends started doing Pomodoro sessions together. And we all found them so helpful, but also, we were lonely in our individual isolated homes. And this really mitigated some of the isolation. So what we did, and we're still doing it, even though we're not as isolated now, but we still do it because we like it. What we do is we get together online in a Zoom room at the top of an hour, and we go around the Zoom room and simply say in like one sentence what our intention is for the next amount of time. And usually we do a little more than 10 minutes. Usually we do about 45 minutes is pretty typical for these sessions. So we just go around and state our intention for the next 45 minutes or whatever it is. And then we turn off our microphones, we turn off our cameras, we do our thing, and then we come back together at the end of the session and we simply go around and say whether we honored our intentions. Yes or no.
That's awesome.
We take a break and if we want to, we do it again. And so, yeah, to this day, I am doing these Pomodoro sessions with my friends and they help us all a lot.
Yeah, instant accountability.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
I want to be your friend.
You can come to the sessions.
I would love
Everybody is
that.
welcome.
I loved that also because I was reading, studying you like a new creature. You got a special commendation in 2020, which is extraordinary teaching in extraordinary times. Tell me a little bit about that, just because I'm dying to know what it means. How did you find a way to reach students in the world when they weren't there? Is that similar to using Zoom, et cetera, or?
Yeah, that was an award that my university gave, and I was very honored by it. It was for teaching well under extremely difficult circumstances, namely the pandemic. I was teaching a large lecture course at the time that the pandemic hit. And at the time, I knew very little about Zoom. Who knew anything about Zoom? Most people didn't. Most people in my world didn't know anything about Zoom. And I had never taught online. I had no idea how to do it. So we all just had to figure out how to do it together. And students had to figure out how to be students online. I was very fortunate that my students really rallied together and supported each other. One thing that I did was I have a lot of hats. And some of my hats are extremely silly. Some of them are serious hats. I like them. I genuinely, sincerely like them. But some of them are more costume hats. And so I started every class session. The class met twice a week, and we went online in March. So we basically had about, I'd say about 6 or 7 weeks left to the semester when we went online. And so every class session, I wore a hat and I put them in a progression from serious to ridiculous. So as the semester went on, my hats got sillier and sillier. And my last hat on the last day of class, and I had planned this from the beginning, my last hat was a plastic Viking hat with horns. And that was a lot of fun. So it was one of those operatic, like, the Viking horns
Oh,
that
the
the opera
wabbit.
singer would wear for the finale. That's what I wore on my last day of class. So, we had to find ways. Again, it's all about coming together and making community and finding ways to communicate and think together and be together under very difficult circumstances. And my approach in the pandemic was to bring some levity to it because we all needed that.
That's awesome. And between that and the Pomodorians getting together, like I do like that idea because Kat Rambo does her classes of online, and there's people that do getting together and just talking, and this coming together in community I think is tremendously valuable for all of us, especially in this scattered times, and for people that are doing writing or creative endeavors out there. It is important to not be alone, to not be overwhelmed with the doom scrolling that we can all do when we first wake up in the morning. And
Yeah,
And continue all day long in some cases.
that's right.
this is why we all share memes, right? God bless memes and comics because they're important.
Yeah, I think we all really are longing for connection with each other. We all need to be in community with each other right now. And we're in this moment that's very politically difficult for many of us, certainly for me. And we need to be together. We need to feel fellowship with each other, to feel real human community. And this book came out of my desire to be connected to the past, to be connected to William Freeman. This book came out of my desire to bring his voice, his very important moral claim from the past into the present, bring it to people that I cared about. And I think it's very fitting that I wrote this book in deep community. I wrote this book with people online, but of course, I started writing the book long before the pandemic. This book took 9 years to research and write, which is amazing since it's just under 200 pages long, including 50 images.
Yeah, but it
Um,
stands for what happens in what order. And
yeah.
there's honestly, if somebody started and could take fire with that, I mean, there's things that I want to say, hey, reach out to me because I have ideas of where people would go. Like Colorado, Dave and I both met at school, University of Colorado Boulder. Colorado has a shit ton of prisons, I mean, private prisons.
Mhm.
And one of the advantages of why people like having a prison in their area is even if they don't have the prison labor, what it does is it pumps up the population because there are states like Colorado that say, you have 300,000 people living here, so that gives you this much representation in government, whereas most of those people that live in that area are actually prisoners and thus
Yeah,
don't get a vote.
there are all kinds
Yes.
of incentives that don't have anything to do with any of the real goals of incarceration. So yeah, don't get me started on for-profit prisons. I think they're a
Yeah.
travesty, and that prison labor is just a travesty on top of that.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And this is another example of people who are not incarcerated benefiting from people who are incarcerated. This is a way that politicians use prisoners in order to benefit politicians.
Mhm.
And my perspective is if we're going to have prisons, they should benefit prisoners. They should benefit prisoners but they should help prisoners live better lives. They should be tools of justice. And the example that you bring up of using prisoners who cannot vote to bolster population numbers and therefore bolster political power, that has nothing to do with justice. And prisons, if they are going to exist, prisons should be all about justice and only about justice. And when we see things like using prisoners as political tools, that is not justice.
I hope this kind of book would open up more discussion in the world about the purpose. I mean, is it paying your debt to society? And if so, how do we treat people when they get out? How do we,
Well, and it sets up a completely wrong set of incentives, right? That we're incentivized to incarcerate more people because it generates more profit. So
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
and from a moral standpoint, my argument is that like we are responsible for these prisoners. We have incarcerated them for various reasons to protect society and all of the things that the justice system is supposed to do, but we're responsible for them at that point. And farming that out to somebody who's doing it for profit is morally indefensible, in my opinion.
yeah.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
Well, it brings up a very modern question we have now. If we have the Geneva Convention for how we treat prisoners of war, etc., what kind of international standard can we start proposing? And I think this is a good way to say this was the past, this is our present. Is there an ideal future state we can look towards?
Yeah,
Well, I'd
that's a
like to think
great
we could do it.
question.
I'd like to think we could do it domestically, not even started internationally. But I'm kind of pessimistic about that view right now. So
Oh, as I said, the fact that your book talks about the difference between the New York system and here's what Pennsylvania is doing, the Quakers trying to say, let's talk about, how do we avoid recidivism? How do we redeem people? And I liked that as an approach, and I think that could be a bigger discussion, rooted in the history of the past and saying which prison does what now, and how do we get a commonality of good goals across the whole system.
although even
Mhm.
that was rooted in this kind of severe puritanicalism, uh, at least from what the book implied. That like solitary confinement was supposed to lead to moral clarity. It's like no, it's an inhumane punishment, but
Yeah.
okay. And these were the Quakers. They were actually some fairly progressive Christians at the time. So it's like a lot of the moral benefits of prison were supposed to have come from were related to religious beliefs at the time, and they were just completely wrong-headed.
Well, I want to be kind. The Quakers gave us the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and Children, so
I'm not saying that there haven't been good things that have come out of that
fair enough.
religion or many others. I'm just saying that as a snapshot of the time, some of the things we're talking about are, uh, have more than one edge, let's just say.
That is true. So, Robin, what advice would you give to somebody who's like, hey, I found this thing in the past. I want to learn about it. But did you make any missteps that you said, wow, that took me extra time? Or what were your lessons learned from writing this?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, let's see. One thing that I would say is that if people are interested in writing about the past, first of all, they should, and they should do primary research. A lot of the research that I did involved going to physical archives. There's a lot of amazing stuff that is digitized. I used a lot of digitized original sources, but not everything is digitized. And to do history properly, to do history responsibly, to really be accountable to the evidence of the past and therefore to the people of the past, people like William Freeman, we have to look to primary documents that can help us hear their voices, that can help us to understand what they were all about. And a lot of that is digitized, but not everything. So you have to get ready to get dusty. I literally got dusty. I went to many, many archives. So I would say if you want to write about the past, do it. Do your research with primary documents that are online, but also go to archives. I spent a lot of time at the Cuga County Historian's Office, which is a public facility in Auburn, New York. And while I was there researching William Freeman and his life and his family and the Auburn State Prison, I met so many people who were investigating their own family histories, and they were interested in learning about the past. These are ordinary people who want to know about the history they care about, and they're going to their local public historians. And this is an amazing resource. Many, many places all over the United States have public historians who are professionals, who are paid by the state, by the county. And these people, these archives are there for you. They are there for you, the American public. So don't forget about them. Go to these archives. There are professionals there whose job it is and whose passion it is to support you, learning about your own family's past, learning about the past of the United States.
Excellent. Excellent. And are you working on any more books like this right now? Or are there any fascinating things that you're like, this is my next project?
I did come across somebody really fascinating while I was writing this book. I came across a stage hypnotist who I thought was really amazing, and I didn't write about him at all in this book, but I thought I need to learn more about him and figure out if he's going to be the subject of my next book. I don't know yet, but I'm thinking about it.
Oh, like I said, your book gave me such a beautiful thing of between the Barnum and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the man with the paintings that did paintings and tableaus and little drama about it. All of these different public entertainments and the psychology behind them and how they affect people was like, I want to write about that now.
Yeah. Yeah, there were a lot of quirky people who walked through this book. You're talking about George Maston, who
Yes.
was a local impresario who basically concocted a stage play about William Freeman. And it was, I should say, not flattering at all to William Freeman. It was very critical of him. But this play actually staged the murder that William Freeman committed. It staged it, and that was really shocking. So there's a chapter about that stage performance that is really astonishing. And he did this stage performance involving large-scale paintings. These paintings were the size of a wall. They were huge. And full color paintings, which still exist. And I was very fortunate. I got to go see these paintings up close. They're not on display anywhere. They're held in a warehouse. I literally got permission to go into this warehouse and look at these paintings from 1846, look at them up close with a flashlight. It was amazing. The research for this book took me to the most amazing places.
That is so cool. Well, I will solicit from you some of these links of how to look up the Cayuga, I think I said that wrong, county archives, etc. But we will put these links to the fascinating things we discussed during this episode on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. Robin, thank you so much. Thank you for writing Freeman's Challenge, the murder that shook America's original prison for profit, and for bringing this kind of a subject, shining lights on it, and making accessible. That's awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It's my delight. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web magic is cast by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineers are Ksenia Chernievskia, with backup by David Welsh and John Schmidt. Our intro and exit music is performed by Michael Ingberg, who lives down under and runs Tin Can Music School. Our podcast sponsors are Jackal Designs, The Bean Scene, Arm Street, and honestly, your little any Pomodoro group you've got out there that works for you. Get your laptop and write. It's super awesome. And hey, thanks for listening.